Hola, hola mi gente, ¿qué pasa? Bienvenidos de nuevo a mi canal. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Ariana and I'm a digital nomad documenting my journeys as I travel around the world. Today I'm tuning in from Medellin, Colombia. I have a travel update video talking about where I was and how I got here and all that jazz, which I will link up above. So today I wanted to chat with you guys about my experience while living in Tel Aviv, Israel. Instead of doing the traditional format that I normally do for my travel vlogs, I wanted to kind of switch things up and instead sit down and tell you guys about my experience that I had while showing you some clips of what the place looks like. Full disclaimer, everything that I will be sharing in this video is purely from my experience and perspective as a solo black female traveler. Nothing in this should be taken as anything other than that, my personal experience. It shouldn't discourage you from going to travel and visit a country for yourself. And yeah, so there's no guarantee that anything that I experience in this video you would necessarily experience. So without further ado, let's hop into the video. Before traveling to a new country, I usually do some research so I'm at least aware of the basics, like what the language is, how much things cost, what the culture is like, and what types of food people eat. And although I did the same research before traveling to Israel, I still felt extremely unprepared for the experience I had while I was there. Visiting Israel actually had never crossed my mind until I met a group of Israelis randomly at a hostel in Costa Rica. They seemed really friendly and had nothing but great things to say about the country where they were from, which in hindsight, I think this would be the case for most people when it comes to their home country. The way that they had hyped it up got me thinking about what it would be like to visit, and although it would take more than just a friendly encounter to actually motivate me to go, it did put the idea in the back of my mind. Around the same time, my good friends from high school had a great idea to get us all together to celebrate 15 years of friendship in Greece. Now, knowing that Greece is quite a bit of distance away from South America, where I had been doing most of my traveling at that time, I started to think about which countries I could visit that were located near and around Greece that would ideally put me in the position to get a cheaper flight. This is when Israel came back to mind. I remembered the friendly group I had met in Costa Rica, and I started Googling to learn more about the country. So many search results popped up describing Israel as completely safe and a great place for solo female travelers. In hindsight, I wasn't able to find much info on other Black women's solo travel experiences, but the safety reviews seemed sufficient enough for me to give it a try. Based on the articles I had read about traveling to Israel, I anticipated a complex process to get into the country. I was interviewed once before checking in for my flight, and again as I was actually checking in. I also had to pit stop in a secluded room with 2 security agents for an extensive bag check that required thoroughly going through all of my belongings and questioning everything I had brought with me. Had I not known from the articles that I had read what the process would be like, I honestly would have been a little freaked out by the whole experience. Once I arrived in Israel, I was interviewed a 3rd time before I could finally head to my Airbnb. Now, if you've been following my channel, you already know that my first 24 hours in Tel Aviv were no bueno. The Airbnb I originally booked was a scam, but fortunately there was a Selena hostel located close by where I could use some credits that I had left over to book a night stay while I figured out another accommodation. Selena was only a short 5-minute drive away from the initial Airbnb that I had booked, but because I had all of my luggage with me, I have 2 suitcases, y'all. I needed transportation to get to the hostel. I had spent 20 minutes trying to hail a cab or call an Uber until finally a lady at a nearby coffee shop told me about an app called Git. Now, keep in mind that although I was traveling into Tel Aviv that day, I still had to work. Israel is 6 hours ahead of Eastern Standard Time, so I didn't think it would be necessary to take off work since I landed in the city at 6 a.m. Israeli time. Using the app, a taxi showed up within minutes, and although I was still a little irritated with the Airbnb situation, I was glad that things were finally starting to get on track. Or so I thought. Over the course of 5 minutes, I watched the taxi meter go from 11 shekels while we were sitting at a stoplight, which was 1 turn away from the hostel, to 50 shekels by the time we went through the light. Now keep in mind that 50 shekels at that time was around 14 to 15 USD, which isn't horrible, especially given the cost of Ubers in the US. But this was the second time I had been scammed in less than 3 hours of being in this country. I calmly asked the taxi driver how the rate could suddenly jump up in price in the way that it did. And he starts naming a list of things that he's charging me for. 10 shekels for using the taxi app, 7 shekels for each one of my suitcases, another 10 shekels just because I was sitting in his car. At this point, y'all, I was over it. To make a really, really long story short, the taxi driver ended up physically grabbing me by the wrist to try and prevent me from walking into the Selena. And despite it happening in broad daylight, because mind you, it's like 8 or 9 in the morning with plenty of people around, everyone just stared at me as I yelled for help. Like I said, the first 24 hours were no bueno. I had really hoped that my first day in Tel Aviv wouldn't be a precursor to what the rest of my experience would be like in Israel, but unfortunately it was. Thankfully, I didn't experience any other situations that ended up with someone's hands on me, because otherwise I might have been making this video from Tel Aviv jail. But there wasn't a day that went by in the 3 weeks that I was there that someone didn't try to scam me or overcharge me, as if things in Israel aren't already expensive enough. Tel Aviv is literally one of the most expensive countries in the world. There were times I would be casually minding my business and someone would just go out of their way to be rude. The attention I received from men was especially undesired, and though a lot of them are physically attractive, don't get me wrong, Tel Aviv is a beach city, so it's expected that the people that live there have beach bodies. I found majority of the men to be utterly repulsive and honestly professional gaslighters. There was constant tension everywhere when it came to money, whether it was an interaction with a man, a woman, or other. I felt like people were constantly on edge and extremely passive aggressive. The Israelis that I did socialize with would often joke about another country bombing them or a bus being blown up. And I guess when you're in that type of environment, you have to be able to find the humor in things, but truthfully, I never found it funny. I met up with one of the guys from the friend group that I had met in Costa Rica. And long story short, we no longer communicate. And honestly, I have absolutely no intention of ever returning to Israel again. Tel Aviv itself is a beautiful city, but for me, the people there were just not it. I did try and explore other parts of Israel too, just to give it a fair chance, and I took a day trip to Jerusalem, where I ended up encountering some of the most racist and nastiest people I have ever encountered outside of the United States. Aside from the rude people I crossed paths with in Jerusalem, as a Black female traveler, I never felt like I was mistreated by anyone because I was Black. If anything, I felt like being Black made me stand out in a desirable, even quote-unquote exotic way. But this wasn't necessarily great because I was attracting attention that I didn't want. In my opinion, being alone as a woman had a lot to do with what I experienced. And if I ever had to go back, I would go back with at least one other person. To end on a brighter note, there are some things I did enjoy while I was there. I loved making morning trips to the Carmel market and stocking up on delicious fruit and fresh bread. Riding the scooters around the city was my favorite way to commute, and it was super convenient and pretty affordable, I guess you could say, for Israel. Tel Aviv has a nice infrastructure, so it makes it easy for bikes, scooters, and pedestrians to transit around safely. And the bus and the metro system are also pretty convenient and fairly easy to navigate. The beaches too were really nice, and the nightlife is very lively. There are plenty of things to do and see in and around the city. So all in all, Israel was not it for me as a solo Black female traveler. There were a lot of lessons learned while I was there though, the biggest one being that I really need to take a self-defense class. And although I'm grateful for all of my travel experiences, good, bad, and ugly, this one I wouldn't have mind cutting short if I had a chance to go back and do things differently, like maybe staying there half of a week instead of a full 3. So that concludes my travel experience in Israel. Thank you so much for watching, and please let me know how you enjoyed this video in the comment section below. As I mentioned before, this is purely my experience. Please take it as such. If you are interested in visiting Israel, don't let me stop you. Do go and experience it for yourself. And if you go and you like it, let me know, because I would love to hear someone else's experience in the country that was better than mine. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more videos like this one. Next up, I'll be sharing my experience traveling as a Black female in Split, Croatia. Hasta luego.